All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Selma Woolf, for dedicating all the Shiurim and drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah for all of those in need, in the zchus of our brave soldiers and in the zchus and merit Hashem of the return of all of our hostages. We dedicate all of Maseches Bava Kamal Eliyahu Neshama, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Yikom Nama. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Baruch will give his Neshama and aliya and his family a Neshama. With that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, but we will get through it. So we'll say, so today's daf is Pei 85, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Pei Daled Amud Beis 84b, and I believe, I'm sorry. We're going to count from the top today. Actually, I'm just going to give you a Mara Makam on the page. Let's not get caught up in counting lines, right? So we are picking up at the first wide line. First wide line. Let's say thank you. Let's say first wide line. So remember again, to reorient ourselves a little bit, we got into the very interesting sugya about the ability of Beis Din to operate in Bavel, given the fact that in Bavel there was no smicha. There was no the actual or pure rabbinic ordination wasn't in effect in Bavel. So essentially, the way the Gemara explained it was in Bavel they really operate as a satellite of the Eretz Yisrael Batei Din. But because the shlichus, so the Eretz Yisrael Batei Din, but because they operate as a satellite, because of shlichus, so they are limited in terms of which types of cases they were going to adjudicate. So the Gemara essentially said that halacha l'maisa, they'll only adjudicate mammon cases, right, monetary cases, that have a more, we'll call it fixed amount, and also common cases, milsa de shricha. But milsa de lo shricha, uncommon cases, they're not going to adjudicate. So the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, Daha Rav Papa Agbi. So the Gemara says, good. Am Yisroel Daha Rav Papa Agbi Arba Meozuzi Leboshes. So we'll say, so the Gemara says that Rav Papa collected 400 zuz for boshes, for humiliation. Let's say, Rav Papa, the Shalach le Rav Chista Rav Nachman, the Shalach le Chista. So we'll say, how could Rav Papa collect 400 zuz for boshes? After all, again, what about the fact that Rav Chista sent a message to Rav Nachman, or the Gemara says, V'shalach le'chista knasa kamag misbababel. Rav Chista, you're collecting knas in Bavel Nabos, and I remember again, without smicha, also you can't collect knasos, you can't collect knas, you can only collect mammon. So how is Rav Chista collecting knas? Elaki abdin and shlichu sayu b'milsa d'shricha v'isbei chisaron kis. So I'll say what we're redoing now is we are redefining our parameters under which the Beis Din in Bavel operates. So when does Bavel collect money? Number one, has to be a milsa de shlicha, something that is common. And number two, they only collect money when there is chisaron kis, when someone is out money, right? In other words, that someone ultimately, again, has lost money. Then they'll go ahead and collect to make them whole. Aval milsa de shlicha, but something, even if it's common, but ultimately, again, there's no loss of money, or inami milsa de lo shchicha, or something uncommon, even if there is a loss of money, lo avdina shlichu sayu. Beis Din in Bavel will not go ahead and adjudicate that particular case. So now two new criteria. Number one, milsa de shchicha. Beis Din in Bavel will only get involved, number one, if it's a common case, right? A common case. And number two, that the victim has actually lost money. Now we'll say, now watch this, let's plug in the formula. Hilchach, Adam ba'Adam, therefore in damages, interpersonal damages, afagav de ispei chisaron kis, even though again the victim has lost money, kevan de lo shlicha lo avdina shlichu sayu. Well, says, go back to yesterday's stuff. Apparently, Adam ba'Adam, by damage of man against man, apparently is uncommon. See, even though, again, the victim has lost money, because it's an uncommon case, therefore the Beis Din will not get involved in it. Boshes, listen to this. What about payment for humiliation? Afagav the shricha, even though, again, halacha l'maisa, it's common. We'll say, isn't that interesting? Apparently, in Bavel, it wasn't common for one person to damage another person, but incredibly common for people to embarrass each other. Interesting. So Boshes, afagav the shricha, Kevin the less bechisar and kisla din shlichu sayu. And I will say, here's what's interesting. But in Bavel, they would not collect for Boshes. Why wouldn't they collect for Boshes? See, by Boshes, there's no loss of money. Isn't that interesting? We can come up with a case of Boshes that would result in a financial loss, but in general, humiliation is that I've humiliated someone, but lav dafka, they lost anything. So therefore, again, in Bavel, they wouldn't collect for Boshes because Lamaisa, the victim, is not out any money. Fascinating. B'shar Govin, they would write damages of a shar against shar, they would collect in Bavel. So no, sorry, B'shar Govin, and they collect money for damage from one shar to another in Bavel. So the Gemara says, V'hamara Rabba, shar shehizik, if a shar went ahead and damaged, ain't governor, so the Bavel. Ultimately, we don't collect it in Bavel. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, Da'azik man, who is the shar damaging? Ilema da'azik adam, if the shar is damaging a person, so my area shar da'azik adam, afilu adam da'azik adam nami governor so Bavel. So they'll say, of course not. In other words, in Bavel, they don't even collect a case of a person damaging a person. I'll ask Kama v'Kama, they're not collecting from a case of a shar damaging a person. Elapshita da'azik shar. Rather, we must be talking about shar on shar violence, right? That ultimately, again, the shar is attacking the shar. Vekatani in governos of a Bavel. And yet, what does it say? The Brisa says that Allah Chalamaisa, they're not collecting in the Bavel. Amri Hasam Bitam Hacha B'muad. Was very interesting. So how do you resolve the contradiction? Do they or don't they collect for damages of shar against shar in Bavel? To which the Gemara answers, it depends. One is talking about a case of tam, one is talking about a case of muad. Tam, they don't collect. Muad, they do collect. And that makes sense. Why does it make sense? So Rashi points out over here, which we can't afford even to look in Rashi's direction today, right? But at least I'll tell you that. So Rashi points out over here, Rashi says that tam is chatzinezek, chatzinezek is knas. Chatzinezek is knas, half damages is knas. So because ultimately, again, chatzinezek is knas, therefore, halacha l'maisa, they don't collect it in Bavel. But ultimately, again, nezek shalim, that's the muad case, nezek shalim, ultimately, again, is mamon, and they will go ahead and collect it in Bavel. Incredible. Once again, V'hamar Rava, ein muad b'Bavel. But here's the problem I'll say. You can't have a muad case in Bavel. Why can't you have a muad case in Bavel? Right? In order to run, you have to walk. So remember again, in order to become a muad, what has to happen? You ultimately, again, have to go ahead and become a tam. Well, if you can't become a tam in Bavel because it's a knas, then ultimately you can't become a muad. We'll say incredible. So the Gemara says, Amri di yayid hasam. No. What's the case? The case is where the shar became a muad in Eretz Yisrael. And then he came to Bavel and did damage in Bavel. The Gemara says, come on. But one second. Come on, Bosa. You want to talk about a milsad shlicha, an uncommon case? You're going to tell me now the case, the way we're setting it up, is that the animal became a muad in Eretz Yisrael, and then it came to Bavel as a muad? Come on. And we're going to start legislating for that kind of case. So the Gemara says, no, you're right. The Asura Banan the Hasam, the Aduaha. It must be a case, I will say, of where there were dayanim from Eretz Yisrael who came to Bavel, who made the animal a muad in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sorry, in Bavel. So the Gemara says, really, sof, milsad lo shchicha. That's also milsad lo shchicha. That's such a random and uncommon case. Va'at amrid milsad lo shchicha, lo kavdina shchichu sayu. And you said that Allah Chalamayis again, any uncommon case, the Beis Din in Bavel does not adjudicate. Elakika amar Rava. Rather, Rava say, when did Rava say, ultimately talking about an animal that's a muad in Bavel, b'shein v'regel demuadin mitchila saninhu. Rather, I will say, when we speak about muad liability in Bavel, which muad liability in Bavel exists? Shein and regel. Also, you've seen this, right? This goes back to our previous sugyas, that we know that an animal is considered to be a muad for shein and regel from the beginning. From the beginning, that would be a case, ultimately, again, that they would adjudicate in Bavel. So Rabbi say, so interestingly enough, the way the Gemara emerges is, it appears that in Bavel, so just kind of what we have over here is, that in Bavel they lack Elohim, right? In Bavel they lack expert judges with smicha. So therefore the only way that the Batei Din in Bavel operate is as an extension, as a shlichus or as a satellite Beis Din of the Beis Din Eretz Yisrael. But with all of that, they're still limited in the scope of adjudication. And specifically, what will they adjudicate in Bavel? Only cases, number one, that are common, right? That are common, and and that are, well, I guess we have these three criteria. Cases that are common, cases that are mammon, right? And cases where there is a defined loss to the victim. But if the case in question doesn't really meet those three criteria, then ultimately, again, based in Bava will not undertake it. Good. We'll say two das. Let's go back there. Tsar. So we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah spoke about tsar, payment for pain and suffering. So kaval b'shiput ob misamer. So let's remember again, what was the case of tsar? The case of tsar is, Reuven went over to Shimon and he burnt him b'shipod with he burnt him with a spit, right, or with a nail. So the Gemara said, and I remember again, the example in the Mishnah of tsar was a case of tsar without nezek. So pain without damages. What was that case? So for example, if you go ahead and you write Reuven burns Shimon on the fingernails. So there's pain, right, there's pain, but at the end of the day, there's not damage. So the Gemara says, so you see from the Mishnah that you pay for tsar, you pay for pain and suffering, right? Even if there is no damage. So the Gemara says, Man Tana, who is the Tana? Whose opinion is this? So the Gemara says, Amarava ben Azai. It's ben Azai Disanyo. Rabbi says, Rabbi Omer, Kiviyah ne'emra tchila. Ben Azai Omer, Chabura ne'emra tchila. So it's actually very interesting. So the pasuk in question is, Kiviyah tachas kiviyah, which means a burn for a burn. Petza tachas patza, right? Literally an injury for an injury. Chabura tachas chabura. So chabura also translated as injury. We'll see the difference between a petza and a chabura. So they both say. So now the question is, which part of the pasuk do you begin to darshan from? So ultimately, again, Rebbe says we begin to darshan ultimately again from kaviyah. Ben Azai says we begin to darshan from chabura. So by my pligi. So also, what are they arguing about? Rebbe savar kaviyah delespe chabura mashma. So Rebbe says kaviyah, a burn, right, means a burn without injury, or without an injury, without damages. Mashma. So kasav rachmana chabura legaluye ela de kaviyah de ispe chabura in the ilo lo. And it was according to Ben Azai. According to Rebbe, halacha l'mayse, even though kaviyah by itself would mean a burn without damage, the Torah then adds in chabura to teach you, you're only chayev for a burn if the burn has damage. If the burn doesn't have damage, there's no liability. Or Ben Azai holds, kaviyah de ispe chabura mashma. No. The word kaviyah, burn, has an inference that it's a burn that has damage associated with it. So kasav rachmana chabura, the Torah adds in chabura, legaluye alot de kaviyah de lespe chabura. So the Torah adds in chabura to teach me that no, chabura is damage, and kaviyah also ultimately teaches me that even if it's a burn without damages, ultimately, again, one will be chayiv. So we'll say, fundamental machlokes as to whether or not there is liability for a burn that doesn't have nezek, a burn that doesn't have damages. Rebbe ultimately says that halacha l'maisa, you are chayiv. Ben Azai says you're not chayiv. So let's analyze this more. Maskef l'rapapa, rapapa rezekasha adarabba ipcha mistabra. The opposite would appear to be true. Rebbe Omer Kaviyah Nemra Tchila. So Rebbe holds that we darshan Kaviyah first, Savar Kaviyah de Ispe Chabura Mashma. He holds that tells you that it's a burn that has damages. Therefore, again, Kasav Rachmana Chabura Legaluye Ele de Kaviyah de Lespe Chabura. Ultimately, with the presence of the word Chabura, that teaches me that Kaviyah, you're chayiv for it, even if it doesn't have damages. Even if it doesn't cause damages. Ben Azai says, Chabura Ne'emra Tchila. We darshan Chabura first. Savar Kivun de Lespe Chabura. Savar Kaviyah de Lespe Chabura Mashma. He holds that Kaviyah burn. Makes it sound like it's a burn, dafka without damage. Chasav Rachmana Chabura. Legaluye alod de Kaviyah de Ispe Chabura. In lo. And ultimately the Torah adds in Chabura to teach me that only if the burn comes with damages are you chayiv, but if the burn doesn't have associated damages, you're not chayiv. To which the Gemara says, in lo va'amaskana kaini. Inam, the other possibility is the chuli alma. We'll say last line on pei daled amud beis. The chuli alma kaviyah bein de ispe chabura bein lespe chabura mashma could very well be. I will say that kaviyah liability for a burn is whether or not the burn causes nezek, whether or not the burn causes any kind of damages. V'hacha, it was like top of Pei 85a. V'hacha Beklal uprat meruchakim zemizek hamiflagi. So we'll say over here, what's the machlokes? The machlokes is, what do you do with a klal uprat that are not immediately juxtaposed to one another in the pasuk, as the way this pasuk turns out. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Sabar, because we'll say, remember again, essentially the two phrases in this pasuk that we're really darshaning is kaviyah tachas kaviyah and chabura tachas chabura. But they're not right next to each other in the pasuk. Instead, again, you have an interposing phrase, which is petza tachas patza. So, how can you darshan a klal uprat when the two phrases are not juxtaposed? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Savar ein danin oso b'klal uprat. Rabbi says, no, if they're not juxtaposed, you cannot go ahead and dan in a klal uprat. Ben Azai Savar danin also a klal uprat. Ben Azai says you can. V'chitema chabura l'Rebbe lamali. So according to Rebbe, what do you use the phrase chabura? If you can't darshan for klal uprat, the Gemara says l'damim yiserim, comes to teach us ultimately again that there are other buckets of damages. Okay, now we'll say, how do we paskin? So we paskin ultimately again that halacha l'maisa, there is tsar, even shalom b'makom nezek, that you could pay for pain and suffering, you could pay for pain even in a case where there is no actual damage. So for example, we'll see, hopefully we'll get to the Rambam today, but we'll see that this specific case of like burning someone on their fingernails, where there definitely is pain, but there's no damages, there would still be liability. Now, how we assess that is going to be a bit more complicated. So let's go back during the Gemara. Tsar. So the Gemara says, Omdin kama adam kiyotze bazer rotza litol. So we'll say, so if you remember again, the Mishnah said as follows. The Mishnah said, so this is all still in the same case, right? So Reuven goes over to Shimon and he burns him on the fingernails. So now we've established you have to pay tsar even shalom b'makom nezek, even when you haven't caused damages. So now, what's the $1 million question? How do you assess that? So the Mishnah said, what did the Mishnah say? Omdin kama adam kiyotze bazer rotze lito lios mistarakach. So the literal lashon of the Mishnah is, how much would you have to pay a person to subject themselves to that kind of pain? That's what it sounds like, right? So in other words, somebody came over to you and says, okay, how much money would it take to allow me to burn you on your fingernails? Right? Name your price. So it sounds like that's the amount of money that ultimately, again, Reuven has to pay Shimon. So also let's analyze this. So tsar b'makom nezek hechi sheminon. So we'll say, so first of all, in a case of tsar b'makom nezek, so in a case where literally, again, there's pain and there's damages, how do you assess that? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, Omdin kama adam rotza lito liktoa lo yado. So okay, we ask, we ask, how much would a person be willing to accept to have their hand cut off, the arm cut off? What would be your price? So the Gemara says, we're at a very vulnerable time in the capital campaign now. So suddenly all of these questions take on different, 2.36 million, right? So Gemara says like this. So Gemara says, Liktoa lo yado, lo tzar lechudehu, hakula chamisha dvarim ikar. Now both say, 1 second. So first of all, the act of cutting off your hand, so first of all, that doesn't just involve tsar, right? That's not just tsar, that's all the buckets of payment. In other words, right, remember again, the loss of a limb is not just the tsar payments, right? There's sheves, there's ripoy, there's boshes, there's nezek, there's a whole bunch of stuff over there. So the Gemara says, Bishuf Tani Askinon, and we'll say furthermore, are we talking about a fool? We'll say, the Gemara presupposes that there is no price that a person would be willing to accept for the loss of a limb. The person just wouldn't, in other words, it's illogical. It's illogical. The impact that would have on a person's life is not worth whatever amount of money they could potentially glean from it. So the Gemara says, so that can't be the formula. Ella, liktoa yado hakitua. So also rather, maybe it means like this. Let's say a person, Rahman al-Islam, has a situation where essentially their hand is already effectively cut off. Let's say a person has a limb that's not usable. Right? So now, again, the hand already is unusable. So how much money would a person accept to have it amputated? Okay, so I'm not losing the effectiveness of the limb because the limb essentially is not effective. So how much money would I accept to have it cut off? So the Gemara says, Yadak tu anami lo tsar lechudeika, hat saru boshes ika. Dikseifa le'milsa, le'mishkal le'mibsaro, le'mishache le'klavim. Shabbos say, even in the case of, let's say, an arm that's not usable, l'maisi again, it's still not only a tsar payment, there's a boshes payment, right? What's the boshes payment? What's the embarrassing payment? So first of all, it's embarrassing for a person not to have a limb, and also to see their limb cut off and then thrown to the dogs for consumption. The idea over here is the embarrassment involved in having a discarded limb. A discarded limb. So there's both. So let's remember, we're trying to figure out a case of just tsar. And the point the Gemara is making over here is using this formula that you've come up with, it's never just tsar. Ela omdin kama adam rosalita liktoa lo yado hamuchtav lamalchus bein sam l'sayif. So again, listen to this formula. We assess, we'll say, let's say a person was already guilty of a crime, and their punishment was the malchus was going to cut off their arm. Right? So I will say, so now, what's the shayla? The malchus is going to cut off, we'll call it Ruvain. The malchus is going to cut off Ruvain's arm by just lopping it off with a sword, which is pretty painful. So we'll say, so now how much would Ruvain pay, how much would a person pay to have like an anesthetic, so to speak, right? To have a more humane amputation. So how much? So in other words, the arm is getting cut off regardless because Ruvain's been condemned from the malchus. So how much would a person pay to have the arm removed in a non-painful fashion versus having it removed in a painful fashion? Lo shakel mitzar nafshe ela umdin kama adam rotza litain. So the Gemara says once again. Amri hachinami lo shakel umitzar nafshe. We'll say still a person wouldn't willingly subject themselves to that. It's still not a fair question. Ela omdin, rather here it is. Here's the formula. Ela omdin kama adarotze litin liktoa lo yado hamuchtav lamalchus bein sayif b'sam. So the Gemara says like this. Rather, what's the formula? The formula is that I will say once again, if a person had to have their arm amputated, right? So again, and it was going to be amputated with a sword. So how much would they give? How much would they give? How much would they give? Ultimately, again, not receive, but how much would they give in order to have the amputation done in a less painful manner, or in a painless manner? So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Haylital litin mi baile. It shouldn't say how much would they accept, rather it should say how much would they give. Ravuna Braid Rav Yoshua lital ze mizeh mashen. Lital ze mizeh mashen nasan ze. What it means is, I will say, remember, we're referring to the amount of money that a person would take from the damager. So in other words, let's say how much money would the victim take for the damager? The amount that he would pay in order to have a painless amputation. So I will say, interestingly enough, this seems to be how the Gemara concludes, that how do we assess tsar without nezek? So again, assuming that a person was going to lose his arm, right? That was a fait accompli. So ultimately, again, how much would he pay to have it removed in a non-painful fashion? And that amount that it's the amount that you'd be willing to pay to save yourself from tsar. That's tsar. Fascinating. So the Gemara says as follows: Ripui hiko chayv raposo. So I'll say, by the way, and that I will point out. That's actually how the Rambam paskin. So we don't have time for this. Parak chovel Masek, Parak Beis Halacha Yud. The Rambam says, he says, Kama Adam Rotzel Litain Bein Liktoa Lo Ever Ze B'Sayif O Liktoa Oso B'Sam Im Gazer Alav Hamelech Liktoa Yodo O Raglo or Omdin Kama Yesh Bein Zela Zel Mushalayim Azrik. So that's it. In other words, that Halacha L'Maisa, the Rambam codifies this. Then what's the definition of tsar? We look at again, if a person had to lose a limb, it's going to be cut off regardless. How much money would you pay? Would you be willing to pay in order to have the limb removed in a painless fashion versus a painful fashion? And that is the amount ultimately again that we call tsar. Ripui. So we'll say, remember again, there's also a payment for doctor bills. You injure someone, you have to pay their doctor bills. So ripui hiko chayiv l'raposa. So we'll say you go ahead and you injure someone. You pay for the doctor bills. So Tan Rabbanon alubot smachim machmas hamaka v'nistera hamaka chayiv l'raposa v'chayim litimo d'mei shifto. So what's now an interesting case? Reuven injures Shimon, and as a result of the injury, ultimately again Shimon gets infection. Smachim literally again are sores. It means he gets some type of infection. So ultimately again, even if even if the wound itself is subsequently healed, halacha l'maisa, you're chayiv to go ahead and pay for the medical bills, for the secondary medical bills based on the sores, right? Based on the sores. So the Gemara says, furthermore, you're also chayiv to pay for lost wages. The person can't work. Shalom machmas hamaka, but if there are sores, or for that matter, lost wages, but not as a result ultimately of the makkah, Eino chayiv l'raposo, you're not chayiv to pay for medical bills. Ve'eino chayiv litin lo debei shifto. And ultimately, again, you're not chayiv to pay for lost wages. And I both say, it sounds kind of obvious that halacha l'maisa, if Reuven injures Shimon, and then sores unrelated to the injury come up, that the Gemara has to say that Reuven doesn't have to pay for that. So we'll say, so here's the havamina. The havamina is, maybe once you injure someone, you've compromised them. And we'll say, you know what it's like? It's like when a person is hospitalized. So sometimes just being in the hospital, right? There's all this stuff going on around you. People contract this, they contract that, they have different things. And I went into the hospital for X, or Reuven went into the hospital for X. But then again, there was this infection, there was that. So the havamina is like this. The havamina is, Reuven, once you injured Shimon, even though now, let's say, Shimon develops an infection unrelated to the injury, directly unrelated, maybe you've created from a compromised health scenario. And because of that, you should be chayiv. Kamash malon, no. Kamash, that we don't say. So the Gemara goes back to Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af machmas hamaka chayiv d'raposo, ve'eno chayiv litin lo demei shifto. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, any sores or infections as a result, ultimately again of the injury, you're of course chayiv to go ahead and take care of his doctor bills, but you're not chayiv to pay him for lost wages. The Chum Sebo said this is the second Chachamim. They hold shifta or refuah. So, right? Ultimately, they will say they see a linkage between lost wages and doctor bills. If halacha l'maisa you are chayiv ultimately for doctor bills, you're chayiv for lost wages. But if you're not, and vice versa, you're chayiv for lost wages, you're chayiv for ripui. But if you're not chayiv for one, you're not chayiv for the other. They're interconnected. We'll see the svara. So it might come miflagis. So we have a three-way machlokis. What is the machlokis over here? Here we go. Amar Rabba said, Ashkechasinu l'Rabbana b'bei Rav. I found the rabbi sitting in the yeshiva of Rav Diasevika Amri Ha'acha b'maka nitna la'eged k'miflagi. Rabbi said, this is fascinating. What's their machlokas? Their machlokas is, are you supposed to bandage up an injury? Now I will say, the Gemara is operating with the following premise. Premise one is that exposing a wound to open air is the fastest way for the wound to heal. Okay? Also, potentially subjects the wound to other stuff. Okay? But the fastest way to get the wound to heal is leave it open, leave it uncovered. All the Gemara also presupposes that for personal comfort, a patient would always rather go ahead and keep the wound bandaged. Personally, it's more comfortable. The danger of bandaging is further infection. Without the open air, the wound cannot heal as quickly. So that's again, we'll say, that's not like spirituality. That's Gemara's understanding of medicine, and that's the premise that they are operating with. So the Gemara says as follows. So watch this. So the Gemara says, so machlokes is, do we allow the patient to bandage the wound? Listen to this. Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan will say, first wide line, Rabbanan Savri, Maka nitna la'agad, so Rabbanan hold, no, yeah, so you should bandage a wound. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Maka lo nitna la'agad, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that ultimately you shouldn't bandage a wound. So the Gemara says, Ripui, the Tana Beikra, Mechayiv, Shevis, lo Tana Beikra, lo Mechayiv. And therefore, again, ultimately, again, I will say, if halacha l'maisa, you went ahead and you bandaged the wound, even though you shouldn't have, so the damager will still have to pay for repoi, for doctor bills, because that's written in the pasuk. But lost wages you don't have to pay for. When I said to them, if really you're not supposed to bandage up a wound, so repoi nami lo mechaya. We'll say if you're not supposed to bandage up a wound, and the victim bandages it, and as a result you get sores. Why would the damager, right? Why would the perpetrator be chayav for that? But say everybody holds that halacha l'maisi is supposed to bandage a wound. Watch this. but you shouldn't over bandage it. I don't know, whatever over bandaging it means. I guess that means like no air gets in. So interesting, right? Everyone holds that of course you should bandage the wound to a degree, but don't over bandage it. Rabbi Yehuda Savar came in the Yisera. So Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we'll say, what's the shaila? The shaila is what about a case where the victim did over bandage it? So here we go. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Savar came in the Yisera. Since you're not supposed to over bandage a wound, if you did so, repoy ditana bekra mechayiv. So repoy doctor bills, which are mentioned in the pasuk, you're always going to be chayiv. Sheves delo tana bekra lo mechayiv. But Sheves, which isn't explicitly written in the pasuk, which we'll talk about, ultimately, again, you're not going to be chayiv. For Rabbanan Sabri, the Rabbanan hold, kivon detana bekra beripoi, Sheves nami mechayiv de iskish l'ripoi. The Rabbanan will say, no, that halacha l'maisa, Sheves is connected to ripoi, and therefore, ultimately, again, whenever you're going to be chayiv in ripoi, you're going to be chayiv in Sheves. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Sheves lo mechayiv, won't be chayiv in Sheves. Why? The mi'ata rachmana rak. Because I'll say, ultimately, again, the Torah has the phrase rak. Rak is an exclusionary word. L'shalo machmas hamaka hu da'asa. And the word rak, ultimately, again, I will say, the Rabbanan say that rak ultimately comes to teach you that for any type of ripui that is not associated with the actual damage itself, you're not going to be chayv. The Rabbanan Basrai Damri Kol Shechai b'Sheves Chai b'Ripui. According to the second Rabbanan, Rabbanan say, right, who link Sheves and ripui. They see anytime you're chayiv in Sheves, chayiv in ripui. The chol she'enu chayiv in Sheves and chayiv in ripui detana bekra lamali. Why do I need the ripui in the pasuk? They need it for the following halacha. We'll say Desanya. The Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Pasuk says, or Rabbi Shmuel says, v'rapo yirapei. Ultimately, again, we'll say the pasuk says v'rapo yirapei. Why the double lashon? Mikan shenitan rishus l'rofei l'rapos. I will say the double lashon gives permission to the doctor to heal. I will say an incredible Gemara. What's the havamina? The havamina is HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes you sick. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes you sick, who says that we have the right to intervene? HaKadosh Baruch Hu writes, someone who makes me sick, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to make me better, he'll make me better. Who says that anyone has the halachic right to intervene? So I will say, so that's the double lashon of v'rapo yirapei. That teaches us that what? Mikan shenitan rishus l'rofei l'rapos. That a doctor has the license to heal. Incredible. But I will say, now, more than that, the post can bring down, once you have this drasha, then the drasha also tells you, once the doctor has the license to heal, then I have the obligation to go to the doctor. Right? I will say, just to point out, there's no midos chasidus that says, you know what? I'm sick. I'll leave it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? You have no right to do that. Once the license was given to the doctor to heal, then I have the obligation to go ahead and go to the doctor in order to be healed in a case of ailments. Incredible. So I'll say, how do I know that if halacha l'maisa Reuven injured Shimon, right? And ultimately, again, as a result, Shimon sprouts infection, even though subsequently, again, the wound was healed. How do I know that halacha l'maisa Reuven is obligated to pay for any secondary medicinal intervention that's needed because of the infection? So the Gemara says, "V'chayav liton shivto." Furthermore, again, Reuven is also obligated to pay Shimon for any lost wages as a result of the injury. Talmud lomar rak shivto yitain v'rapo yirapei. Pasuk says, you might have thought that Reuven would be chayiv even for any infections that come about, even not as a result of the injury. Talmud lomar rak. Therefore, the pasuk says ultimately rak, which teaches damager is only chayiv for any type of infections as a result, ultimately again of the injury. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af machmas hamake potter. Even if there is infection that comes about as a result of the makkah, you're going to be potter. Shneimar rak, because we'll say he dashes rak. So we'll say it's interesting. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda says you only chayiv for the injury itself. Any subsequent infections that come about as a result of the injury, you're not chayiv for. Very interesting shita. Why? Based on rak. Rak is an exclusionary or limiting word. So the Gemara says, very interesting. Others say, af machmas hamake potter legamre. That will say, ultimately, again, even machmas hamake, you're going to be potter. Kirabanan basrai, this will say, af machmas hamake potter misheves. Others say what he means is, if even machmas hamaki, you're going to be chai, you're going to be pater from Shabbos. The chai beripui kiman who's being like that kavua, ultimately like his father. So we'll say, so essentially what we have over here is a very interesting machlokas. Let's go with what everybody agrees on. What everybody agrees on is that when Reuven injures Shimon, Reuven is going to be chai to pay doctor bills. That's called ripui. We'll say after that, what happens if there's infection caused by the injury? That's a machlokas. That's a machlokas. What happens if there's lost wages caused as a result of the injury? That's a machlokas. So essentially, and we'll resolve all of this, but essentially, halacha l'maisa, the only thing that everyone agrees on is that Reuven injures Shimon, right? He needs medical intervention. Reuven yechayev to pay. That's ripui. Beyond that, right, resulting infections, resulting lost wages, right? That ultimately, again, subject to machlokes. Hold on, we'll resolve it in Yirtzeh Hashem. Let's go weiter. Amar Mar, Yochalav Yidushlom Machmas Hamaka. So we'll say, you might have thought that you'd be chayiv even for infections, not as a result of the injury. Talmud Omar, Rak. Shalom Machmas Hamaka. So the Gemara says, Shalom Machmas Hamaka Ba'ikra. So we'll say, I don't understand. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that infections not caused by the injury I'm exempt from? That's kind of obvious, right? We'll say, can you imagine, right? Reuven injures Shimon, and then, right, so now Shimon goes ahead, he breaks his arm, so now Reuven's obligated to pay for the casting of the arm, right? Coming out of the doctor's office, so Shimon trips, right, and breaks his foot. So is there a havamina that Reuven? I mean, the truth is, if you have a good personal injury attorney, right, you may actually be able to make this case, right? But lamaisa, again, is there a havamina that Reuven's chayiv for that? So the Gemara says, now you're telling me I need a pasuk to teach me that if infections come up not resulting from the injury, you're pater. The Gemara says, really? Like I actually need a pasuk for that? Shalom machmas hamaka ba'ikra amri ma shalom machmas hamaka. Rabbi says, so you're right. What does it mean when we talk about injuries that are not a result, infection that's not a result of the injuries? Kidisanya, here we go. Harush avar al divrei rofe. Both say, watch this. Let's say, right, Shimon is ill, and Shimon goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him instructions. And what happens? Shimon doesn't listen to the instructions. Va'achal dvash. He went ahead and he ate honey. Oh, kol minei mesika, or sweet items, right? Mipnei shedvash v'chol minei mesika, kashan l'makeh. So let's say, so apparently when one has an injury, a chabura, like some type of like physical injury, apparently, again, we'll say, remember, this is Chazal's understanding of medicine. So apparently, again, eating sweet items is not healthy for you. So let's say a person just, right, Shimon has a sweet tooth, he just simply can't stop himself, he eats it, and as a result, the injury is exacerbated. V'hela makaso gargusani. So we'll say, and the Makkah developed gargusani. Now we'll discuss what gargusani is in just a moment. So we'll say, so now just here's the case, right? So Reuven injures Shimon. Shimon goes to the doctor, right? So obviously Reuven's chayav to pay for the doctor bills. The doctor bandages up Shimon, right? If you're allowed to bandage up, right? And he goes in and tells Shimon, okay, here's the rules. No sweets for 2 weeks. Right? What happens? Shimon leaves the doctor's office, decides to treat himself to a chocolate bar. Right? So now, as a result, what happens? He develops an infection. So you might have thought now Reuven is chayiv to go ahead and pay for to treat the infection. Talmud lomar rak. So therefore, we'll say. So what's interesting about this? Right? We'll say the infection is a result of what? What is the infection a result of? What is it a result of? The injuries. Right? But it was brought about because of Shimon's failure to comply with doctor instructions. So in that case, you might have thought maybe Reuven should be chayiv. Why? Because at the end of the day, had he not injured Shimon, so Shimon would not be in this predicament to begin with. Kamash malon, no. Kamash malon, we look at this as really Shimon causing this because of failure to heed his physician's instructions. And therefore, again, Reuven is going to be pater from any further medical intervention over here based on rak. Rak is an exclusionary phrase, so you're not chayiv in this case. So the Gemara says, by the way, my gargusani, what's gargusani? Amrabaye ne'asa krichta. It's very helpful. Ne'asa krichta means a decayed limb. So apparently, again, if you have an injury and you go ahead and you eat sweets, so apparently it sounds like it causes almost like a decay, like a sepsis type of situation in that limb. Okay. But I will say, but bottom line is, it goes without saying that if Reuven injures Shimon and now he has to pay for Shimon's doctor bills, and Shimon develops some totally unrelated infection, of course Reuven's not going to be chayav for that. The chiddush is, if Shimon develops an infection because of the injury that Reuven visited upon him, but the infection was a result of Shimon's failure to heed proper medical advice. I will say, by the way, the sweets would be just like an exaggerated example. We'll say, let's say again, Shimon didn't do proper wound care. He didn't do proper wound care. And as a result, now again, he has another medical complication. Reuven can say, hey, that's not on me. That's not on me. That's on you. Incredible. So the Gemara goes like, I'm Rabbi. No, I'm sorry. Maya Susei. So we'll say, by the way, if a person does have a decaying limb, so what is the remedy for that? So ahala, aloe, vikira. We'll say kira's wax. Vikalba. Kalba will say is the resin inside of a wine barrel. Apparently, right, make this ointment, smear it on the limb, and you're good to go. Vi'i amarle asik. So we'll say, listen to this. This is great. So we'll say, Reuven injures Shimon, and Reuven says, listen. Here's the deal. I'm a doctor. I'll heal you, right? Instead of me paying out of pocket for your medical healing, come to my office. I'll heal you for a small copay. I'll take care of everything, right? Hey, so the mice again, he says, I'll take care of it for you. So Amrlei, so Shimon has the right to say, Damis alai ka'arye arva. You, in my eyes, you are like a crouching lion. In other words, no, thank you. No, thank you. I don't want you to do this. Well, it's very interesting. So Shimon, the victim, has the right to refuse that. Even though Reuven is a physician, Shimon has the right to say, I'm sorry, but you are my damager. I don't want you to be involved in my medicinal healing. My sina asya. The mugging, both say this is incredible. The mugging. So I'll say ultimately, what happens if Shimon says, "Listen, my brother's a doctor, and he'll do me a tov, he'll do me a favor. Let me bring him in to heal you for free." So I'll say this is incredible. Amrlei asya de mugging shana. A doctor who heals for free is usually worth that same amount. I'll say it's actually a very profound idea. That ultimately, again, and we all have this, right? Because there are many wonderful doctors, some of whom are in this room, some of whom my family constantly calls, like Dr. Gladstein, right? So you ask doctors for favors, and they're wonderful and they're great. But say it's just an important yesod as well that when someone does something professionally, ultimately, just understand they have every right, and they should charge for their service, because Lamaisa again, this is their parnasa. So you have to be nervous. You have to be nervous about anyone who always performs their professional service for free. Right? You just have to be a little bit nervous about that. The Gemara says a doctor who is always willing to work for free may be worth exactly that and nothing more. Very interesting. So we'll say, now watch, this is incredible. So now let's say Reuven says to Shimon, okay, you know what, I feel really bad. I want to bring you, this doctor I heard about. He's overseas. He's the best in his field. Also, I want to bring him to heal you. So the Gemara says, a faraway doctor has the ability to blind an eye. Now, we'll say, what does that mean? The expression is like this. You see, the interesting part about people who live far away is that they come in, they do what they do, and then what? They go home. So the problem is when a physician does not have to face his patients each and every day, there's a concern that maybe he's not going to be as careful because Lamaisa, anyway, hey, I'm going home. I'm never going to see these people again. So therefore, again, Shimon has the right to say, I don't want them. So we'll say, what happens if now we're switched? So we'll say, it's very interesting. So halacha l'maisa, there's victims' rights over here, right? The victim has the right to say, I don't want this kind of doctor, do want this kind of doctor. So now we'll say, watch this. What happens if the victim, Shimon says to Reuven, do me a favor. Give me the money, and I'll take care of my own refuah. Right? I don't want you involved. Just give me a refuah payment, and I'll take care of it myself. Amrlei pashata benafshecha v'shak. Havli deva anamasi nafshe. Amrlei pashata benafshecha v'shaklis minay tfei. So we'll say. So Reuven has the ability to say. Ultimately, again, I'm concerned that you're going to end up taking too much from me. Right? We don't know how much it is yet, so I'm going to take too much. For Amrlei, coats li make it, so ultimately it's fine. So let's settle on an amount. Amrlei kol shekin de pashata benafshcha v'kari l'shar hamazek. What's going to be the problem if we settle on an amount? So again, this is fascinating. Reuben has the right to say to Shimon, I'm nervous that you're not going to get the right treatment. Maybe you'll pocket the money, right? Not get the right treatment. And then I'm going to look bad. Why? Because people know that I injured you. And when they see that you're not healed from your injury, it's going to reflect poorly. I mean, people are going to think that I'm shirking my responsibilities. Meanwhile, you pocketed the money, right? And didn't go for the correct medicinal healing. So the Gemara says, Tana, the kulan mishtalmin b'makom nezek. So we'll say, so again, it's therefore interesting enough. Again, we'll see, we don't have time for the Rambam right now, but we'll see the Rambam. So everybody have like this very delicate dance that it almost sounds like what happens over here by Ripui is that Shimon goes to the doctor, Reuben's got to pick up all the bills. Right? So the same way that Reuben doesn't have the right to say to Shimon, listen, come to me, I'm a doctor, or I'm going to find you a doctor, right? Or go to this guy. Reuben is right, Shimon has the right to choose his own doctor, but Shimon also doesn't have the right to say to Reuben, just give me a payment and I'll take care of my own healing. Out of concern that maybe Shimon, the victim, is going to be derelict in that process, and it's going to make Reuven, the damager, look bad. Incredible. Let's go back there. So the Gemara says, Tana, v'kulan mishtalmin b'makom nezek. Now, I'll say, interestingly enough, you still pay ripui, right? You still pay doctor bills, even in the case of damages. So, we don't know this. Amar Rav Zid Mishvei Rava, Amar Kra, Petza, Tachas, Patza, Litin, Tsar, b'makom nezek. So that phrase teaches us that Allah Chalamaisa, you even pay tsar, you even pay pain and suffering, even makom nezek. To which Gemara says, Hami Baile, we need that. We'll say, Amar days. All right, we're getting there. So, Hami Baile, we'll say, the Rabbos, Shogeg Kamezid, Va'ones Kiratzon. We'll say, we're going to see later on, ultimately, again, that drasha is necessary to what? Teach me that halacha l'maisa, you're chayiv for shogig like you're chayiv for mezid, onis kiratzon. Imke ne'emar kra petza bepetza, my petza tachas patza. Why does he use that lashon? Shmami natarti, to teach you both of these halachas. So we'll say, Rava Amar kra for apo yirapeh. The pasuk says apo yirapeh litin refuah b'makom nezek. So we'll say, essentially, what we're trying to show over here is that all of these, we'll call it secondary payments, also apply in scenarios where there are damages. So Rapo Yirapeh teaches me that even where you're paying nezek, even where you're paying damages, ultimately, again, you still have to pay ripui. You still have to pay for medical bills. So the Gemara says, why Rapo Yirapeh? Haimi by the Chiditana. We need the Rapo Yirapeh for a different drasha. What's the drasha? So the Gemara says, the Chidisanya, the Rabbi Shmuel, that's right, the Chidisanya, the Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Shmuel. For Rapo Yirapeh, what does Rapo Yirapeh teach? Rabbi say, that's what we just said before. I need that double lashon of Rapo Yirapeh to teach me that Allah Kalam, I said, doctor has a right to engage in medicinal healing. Imke nichtov kra v'rofei yirapeh. Let the pasuk say v'rofei yirapeh. The doctor will heal. The Gemara says shmamina. So we'll say, why does it say v'rapo yirapeh? Shmamina litain refuah b'makom nezek. So we'll say the double lashon teaches me that even when you're paying damages, so we'll say, what's the havamina? Let's remember again, let's go back to the Mishnah for just a second. How do you assess damages? Remember again, how do you assess nezek? Do you remember? How do you assess nezek? We look at what the person is worth when they are whole, if they were sold as an eved. We look at what they're worth now if they were sold as an eved with their injury. And the difference between those two, that's nezek. I might have thought that nezek is an all-encompassing payment. All-encompassing payment. And maybe you only pay these other things like ripui and sheves when what? When there's no nezek. When there's no nezek. But if you're paying nezek payment, that's like an all-in payment. Kamash Malan, the Gemara is saying, no. Even where there's nezek, you're still going to pay ripui. Where do I know that from? The double lashon of Rapo Yirapeh. Shmamina litin refuah b'makom nezek. V'akati b'alei l'chida amron. 1 second, I still need Rapo Yirapeh to teach me that a doctor has a right to heal. To which the Gemara says, "V'akati mi'baylei l'chida amron lemisni ba'kra beripui imkein lemakra o rapo o yirapeh. If that's the case, then just use the same double lashon. My v'rapo yirapeh. But say, what does it mean when it says v'rapo yirapeh? Shmamina litin refuah b'makom nezek. To teach me that even if you're paying nezek, you're still chay for ripui. So both say so incredible. Salach l'maisa. So far, both say we have ultimately again refuah b'makom nezek. Good. Umichlal. So both say what this sounds like is that there could be a ripui payment, right? A medical, doctor bill payment, even in a case where there is no nezek. So the Gemara says, well, what's that case? Shalom b'makom nezek heichi mishkachas la. So heichi mishkachas lahu tsar. So we'll say, now we'll say, so ultimately, again, the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says like this. So let me read it once more. Mechlad mishkachas lahu shalom b'makom nezek. So we'll say, so now the Gemara says like this. So now, in all of these cases, the fact that you need the drashas to ultimately teach you that these payments apply, shalo b'makom nezek, indicates to us that what? That they could occur shalo b'makom nezek. So the Gemara says, tell me how these cases could come up without nezek. So the Gemara says, tsar kidiktani. So we already saw how tsar could come up shalo b'makom nezek. So the Gemara says, tsar kavol b'shipud om mesamer afiba al tzipar no makom shina osei chavura. So we'll say, so tsar b'makom nezek, that's easy. We saw that before. How do you have tsar b'makom nezek? Reuven goes over to Shimon, burns him on the fingernails. So we'll say there's tsar, right? There's tsar, but there's no damages. Ripui. So we'll say, how do you have a case of ripui without nezek? The hava ka'av leit midi. Let's say again, we'll say, so Shimon had a wound, right? V'salek va'aisili sama chalifa va'ach v'rei lebisra. And I will say, what happened? Reuven came along and poured some type of caustic item on the wound, bleaching the wound. Ultimately, I will say, where again, so now, Reuven's caused Shimon, ultimately again, Reuven's caused Shimon an injury, but it's a reversible injury. It's a reversible injury. In other words, there's another ointment that you could put on to restore the coloration of the skin. So we'll say, so that could ultimately be a case of ripui without nezek. Okay, sheves. Where do you have a case of sheves without nezek, lost wages? So the Gemara says, "Dahadke bi'id runa ubatle." Interesting. I will say, where could you have sheves without nezek? Reuven locks Shimon in a room, and Shimon can't go to work. So I'll say, so what's happened over here in that case? In that case over here, you have lost wages, but what? No nezek. The Gemara says, boshas. Ultimately, where do you have a case of boshas without nezek? Dirak le ba'apeh. Reuven spit in Shimon's face. So there's boshas, there's humiliation, but ultimately, again, there is no damage. So Rabbi says, so two things happened over here. So number one, we see how all of these secondary payments of tsar, ripui, and boshas and sheves could all occur without nezek. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, right, so that's what we proved over here. So the Gemara went through a whole drasha, double lashon. So the psukim showed that halacha l'maisa you be chai for all of these payments, even shlo b'makom nezek. And then the Gemara just proved the actual cases. Like, give me the actual case of having all of these situations without nezek. So halacha l'maisa, you're going to be chai for all of these payments, even if there is no nezek. All right, so let's go one more line. Sheves, ro'on also kimishon kishun. So let me at least just mention this. Remember again, sheves, if you remember again, how do you assess that? Actually, we'll say, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoya. All right, so still a little bit behind, but there is no short daf in the foreseeable future. But in Hashem, we'll have siyata d'shmaya. Let's say tremendous shkoya. What a wonderful week. Beautiful. All right, Chabran Tumah, have a good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. You should get sponsor. Wait, we have Family Dentistry.